Hello and welcome to Awake at the Wheel. So in many of our episodes, we've talked about all different types of relationships. We've talked about the parenting relationship, marital relationships, and everything in between. One thing, however, that we haven't touched on is the importance of the relationships that come from friendships. And specifically, friendships in adulthood is something that I notice comes up often in therapy sessions and something that a lot of people are unsure of how to navigate, especially after 30, 40, 50. It seems to get increasingly difficult and friendships tend to become even more scarce. So interesting because I think that as kids, right from preschool, we're taught how to share and be kind and all the fundamental basic things about friendships. And then even in adolescence, we know developmentally speaking, it's one of the most important tasks, not only because it teaches us social connection, but it also teaches us how to problem solve, develop social skills, and kinds of other different important things. As we get into adulthood, friendships are of equal importance, but tend to be interfered with the demands of life, like kids and families and aging parents and all kinds of things such as that. But oddly enough, it's those things that necessitate the need for close friendships. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about what those look like, how they evolve, and what people can do to help to foster those. So Oren, what are some of your experiences maybe with clients and patients with regard to friendships and friendships in adulthood in particular?
Well, there are a couple of, let's say, types of unhealthy friendship dynamics that I see a lot. So I'm going to try not to single out any groups, but people will hear this and they go, oh yeah, that's definitely, that applies to our community or our group and so on. So especially if there are friendships that were, let's say, fostered at a young age, maybe you all went to a certain type of, let's say, school, not just the school itself, but whether it's a special religious school or a cultural school or after school or on the weekends, you did like language, some kind of language thing from your parents, like native tongue or something. Right. So, and then these groups, they might, have like a camp that they go to each summer or something like that. Like anyway, so from a young age, these kids are really integrated tightly beyond your normal school because it's a community, right? It's an actual community beyond just the school, and peers, because now your parents are involved and they all know each other. So those friendships that started at that youngish age, all right, and then continued. So I deal with a lot of people, whether they're in their adolescent years or later, where they're like, I'm with these people now who, if we had our own druthers, we wouldn't be friends. Okay. But a lot of people, they don't say that. They can't articulate that. This is what it is. This is a person you've known since you're a little child. Like, you've been to their birthdays or to these celebrations and so on. Right. So it's an artificially created friendship group. And like I said, if they were truly, if they had their choice, at this age, they wouldn't have, been with them. But now they're stuck with them. So that's one particular type of dynamic, that it becomes, it's toxic because you see this, it's a bit of a mind effer because these people also knew them in certain stages of their life. And this person might have been a loser when, he was 10, but now at 25 or 30, he's killing it. And so, but when I was 10, I was the head of the group and I'm trying to exert my influence, right? So it can be really challenging when you've gone again through all these different stages and yet you're still, again, artificially stuck together. So that's just one thing I wanted to throw out there. We can build on other relationships, but that's one that I've seen very commonly.
Yeah. And as soon as you started talking about that, I'm like, yeah, you know what? That's probably one of the biggest struggles that I find people have when it comes to dealing with the dynamics of adult relationships is this whole notion of, well, we've been friends for so long. Therefore, it feels like there's this obligation to maintain it long term, even though the dynamic is like what you described. People are holding on to old stuff from childhood or values have changed, interests have changed, you name it. There's all kinds of things. We as humans change and evolve and grow. I would hope we're not the same person that we were when we were 10. But right. There is this strong guilt that comes along with, well, we've been friends for so long. Therefore, I feel like we have to.
Right. And there's also there can be family connections as well, community connections. So yeah, so being able to I've helped, I think, a lot of people see it from a different perspective. And I say, look, there's nothing wrong. You're not betraying them. You're not saying they're terrible people. You've grown apart. And normally you would have drifted apart. But again, you're contained because of all these structures in place that prevent you from drifting apart. So I help them. You're right. The guilt part heart is big, and I help them to be able to like, we see for some people, it's like we have to actually put a stop to it. We have to say something. The most uncomfortable conversation is trying to say something. Hey, you know what? I'm sorry, but and trying to find a nice way to be able to say that we're just not compatible anymore. All right. Or you're toxic or something like that. Whereas in most cases, like I say, that's the worst discussion. But I say, look, in most cases, if you kind of just sort of let things drift apart, you kind of slowly lose contact with them. No hard feelings usually. They might think, oh, I wonder what happened to so-and-so. And so then the guilt is more about, that's like a totally internal, that's your own neurosis, right? Because you haven't done anything that's objectively bad or that other people can hold you to account for. It's just simply, that's how you feel. And so then we explore, why do you feel this way?
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a few different directions that I want to go in here. And for some reason, this popped into my mind. So let's just go here. So I think that for introverts and extroverts, I mean, these are key parts of our personality and don't really change much over the lifespan. But I think as kids and teens, we're in school and, it's just natural that we interact with people. But I think that adult friendships for introverts is especially difficult. But as I say that, I think it would probably be difficult for extroverts, maybe even more so, because they do have that need to be around people and recharge. And yet they're still dealing with those challenges that I mentioned before that interfere with adult friendships. So I think that being really aware of what recharges you. So if you're an introvert, I guess I should clarify to people, many times people assume that an introvert is someone who doesn't like people. Not at all. It's just somebody who spends energy by being around others, whereas extroverts gain energy from being around others. And I think with this high level of loneliness that people are experiencing, I think that's where the introverts probably are suffering more.
Yeah. So that really depends. And by the way, I'm glad that you mentioned like the difference between the introverts and the extroverts, that like, whether it takes something out of you or it re-energizes you. That's how I also distinguish between, I tell people that, because some people say, well, I am really good, in my job, I can be very sociable and everything. I'm an extrovert. Right. And, but they go to one dinner, and if they have to go somewhere afterwards, they're just exhausted after that dinner. So, right. So neurologically, biologically, physiologically, they may not be an actual extrovert. They may have learned to be extroverted, but, and we know for over 50 years, we know that the internal systems, the nervous systems of introverts and extroverts are quite different, which is why, right, these different situations have different impacts on them. So I think it's so important. You're right, for people at the very beginning to at least step back and go, am I an introvert or an extrovert or a mixture of both? I mean, very few people are purely one or the other. Okay. So I always tell people, just think of it like it's a meter for both. How high are you? You can be both high on both, low on both, like, right. As far as, anyway, so the point being, even though physiologically you might be wired a certain way, these attributes, these traits, and so on that develop over life, they get let's say worked into the mix. So in any event, so recognizing which one is more of you, because when you say about the introverts, the loneliness epidemic can really be hard on them. But I also know many introverts who they're perfectly fine because they're introverted. Like they have that one or two people that they need in their life. And whether they see them face to face or whether it's through texting or whatever, that truly does seem to satisfy their interpersonal need. Or they get their interpersonal needs met other ways, whether it's through work, depending on the kind of work they do and so on, right? So I don't want to make it too blanket, because, and I've said this to a lot of parents as well, when they say, oh my God, I'm really worried because my child is always at home and they're doing whatever at home and I want them to socialize. I say, I get that for sure. But don't project your own needs onto them. They may be perfectly fine. It's, in being alone and spending time, they're not lonely, right? So that's where people have to really decide. Being alone does not equate with necessarily being lonely. And conversely, there are many people who have so many people around them, but they always feel alone because they don't connect on a deep level with people who they feel really get them. So again, I'm just trying to work on these different factors. When people are thinking about what can I do about this, look at these different things beyond just a simple, how many people are in my life or how often do I see them?
Yeah, and I think that's where social media really trips people up, because I think we've spoken about in many other episodes, that we are superficially more connected than ever before in any time ever. And yet there is this loneliness epidemic. So I think that, first and foremost, knowing where you get your energy from. I think it's important too, because like that example that you provide where somebody, will go out to dinner and they're completely drained, that might be confusing to some people of like, oh, do I hate people? Am I not good at socializing? Am I fill in the blank. So kind of having a good understanding of, no, that's just me draining my energy. I think that is really important in understanding like what works for someone and what doesn't.
Right. And as social animals, like I read this so long ago, and I'm assuming it's still true because our brains haven't changed that much over the last couple of years. But the study showed that to not feel lonely or alone, you only need one person in your life, okay, who you feel has your back. Even if they don't have your back, if you think they do, this positive illusion is very, like that's all that you need is one person. Now, for some people, psychologically, it may not feel enough. And that's why when I work with people, I say, okay, let's question what is the reality? How are you interpreting it? How is this having an impact on you? Okay. But I tell them, I say, technically speaking, if you felt that you had that one person, that's technically all that you need. And everything above that is gravy. So people should understand that. And if you feel that you don't even have that one person, let's look at that, because that's the definition of being alone. If you really feel that I don't even have one person I can really count on when I need them. Right.
Yeah. So there's two controversial questions that I find come up often in therapy sessions with regard to friendships, and perhaps you've come across as well. So I want to talk about these and see what you think surrounding them. So the less controversial of the two is, can colleagues be friends? I think that that's a difficult one. It depends on the context of your work. It depends on the position that you're in. It depends on, I think, where you're at in life. There's so many different factors. Like when I look at my current position, no, it wouldn't be terribly appropriate for me to be friends with my entire staff. But when I look at some of my closest friends that I currently have, they're colleagues from my previous job. But again, the context there was different than the context now. But what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think certainly it is an important question. And I don't get that question, but I do get the theme of someone saying, like, the reason that work is so, let's say, unrewarding to them or unsatisfying is that they aren't feeling that, that interpersonal connection with their colleagues. There may be 1,000 people in the building and they just don't feel like that they connect with anybody. So to me, that's the big issue. So do I think colleagues can be friends? Again, depending on the nature and so on, 100%. Can family be business partners, or can friends be business partners? That's another question. That's a little different, right? Mm-hmm. But right, if you meet in an industry, in a professional organization or capacity, can you take that outside? I think, my blanket statement is yes, for sure. But then we have to look at all those different factors that could make it difficult, and then blurred lines, because I've seen this happen. And I think everyone's either had it happen or knows of someone who's had it happen, where the lines do get blurred. So then at work, you're thinking, my boss is my friend, so I can get away with certain things. They may not think it consciously, but just naturally or organically, they think that, they'll cut me some slack. And then that puts the boss in a really tough situation, who has to come down, like things like that. So these are the factors that people should take into consideration. But I am telling you that I've had so many people really, they almost get despondent when it's like all this water around me and nothing to drink. Right? Because they just can't connect with the people at work. And what makes it even worse is when they see other groups, there's cliques, there's these people who know each other. They're at the water cooler and they all and here's the thing that I've told, I know we've talked about this before. I think it was in the capacity of DEI, but I'll use it in this capacity, which is, I don't care how old we get. High school, okay? If you watch people, whether it's the government, whether it's at school, a professional organization, whatever, okay? At university, okay? It's high school. And I've told so many patients that I see it through the lens of high school. And you can usually, now there are exceptions, life events happen that make somebody more empathetic or more responsible or a better person or something like that. That does happen. But by and large, when you look at the interpersonal dynamics, when you see either a small group or a large group, when you see males with males or females and males or whatever the case is, right? The way that the person was in the past, it usually dictates to a large degree how they are today. Again, understand there's a lot of intervening factors, because some people are terrible in high school. They really found their pacing when they hit 20 or something like that, and now they're much different. But anyway, the point being, I tell people that you have to treat it like that, because a lot of people have a hard time thinking that way, because they're wondering, I am at work. Why do I feel excluded? Why is that? And I say, well, again, this happened in high school as well. So you have to think, how am I going to either make allegiances, right? How do I ingratiate myself in a way that doesn't make me feel like I'm being obsequious and then going as my values? Like, how can I do that? And I say, it doesn't happen organically. Same with high school. Okay. When you're thrown in high school, you don't organically start, some people, like if you're all athletes, maybe. Okay. But for the most part, you have to work at it. Or if you're in high school, these are people, there are people from the junior high school or elementary school that you knew before. So that was kind of imposed, like you had a leg up. But when you go into a work setting, you don't have that. Well, there's, in some cases you might have a few, but for the most part you don't, right? So I say you got to put a lot of effort into that. And I know you had there are the two questions, but I want to add one more thing that might be relevant to the second one as well, which is, in so many cases, rare is the time actually when someone's telling me, like, they're saying, what, I had all these friends, whether it was from university or high school or, as adults. And, they're saying, well, I know person A and B, I know they get together, and person, C and D and E and F, they get together. But I'm feeling that I'm not part of any of those groups. Like, as a big group, sure, we see each other once every 6 months or a year. But I know all these people get together, here or there, like 2 people or 3 people or whatever. And in every single case, rare is the time when they haven't answered the same question, which is this, where I say, how often do you reach out to them? Mm-hmm. In so many cases, people have to admit that, no, I really don't. I didn't really try to, nurture that relationship, keep it going. And I say to, well, how about those other people? Yeah, of course, they're always contacting each other. Well, but they already have the friendship. It has started somewhere. So I say to people, whether it's in high school, university, or as an adult later on, I say, there are only a few people who never have to reach out to anybody. They're the life of the party. They're the person that everyone goes to. They're the person that everyone wants to be around. Everyone reaches out to them. They never have to outcall. Okay. I say, but that's rare. I say, you have to put that energy in. And of course, people are, well, they're afraid of rejection. They're afraid of, well, what if the two of us get together and it's an awkward conversation? Or and I get all that, but looking at the reality of it and seeing how can I remedy it is far better than just sitting there miserable saying, why don't they call me? Why isn't my relationship stronger? And so on, right? Those kind of questions are, they're literally irrelevant. They're relevant if you actually are asking that, trying to find an answer. Okay. Asking it rhetorically, you're just complaining. So I tell people, you got to put the effort in.
And that said, a complaint that I hear mainly from, what? It's from males and females, is they're the one that's always reaching out, right? So that's something to really be aware of too, is that it's got to be a two-way street. No, don't keep a tally. It doesn't have to be 50-50 per se, but there should be the appearance of a somewhat equal effort on both parts. And if there isn't, then maybe there's other discussion to be had, or like you suggested before, see if the friendship sustains or fizzles out. And not to play games by any means, but it is a two-way street for sure, especially when we're adults and busy and everybody has their own life going on. But if that support from one another is important, it should be maintained by both parties. And Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I agree to some degree, or I agree mostly, but as you're saying, because there's other factors involved. If one person is single and the other person has kids, right? Mm-hmm. The single person has much more ability to reach out, and the person with the kids, they may not be thinking, I want to reach out to the single person, okay, or the person without the kids, and so on. So I say, I agree with what you're saying. Like, it should be reciprocal. I say, but circumstances sometimes mean, or it can even be personality. Some people, they're just like again, I know people, I'm one of these people, for example. I am not necessarily going to reach out to a bunch of people to go out and hang out with them. But if someone reaches out to me, it's like, hey, why not? I'll do it, right? So sometimes people just need that. So what I always tell people is, if you're finding that you're 95 or 100% of the time reaching out and they're never reaching out, I say, how are they responding? If it's always, well, sure, yes, but they're always putting you off and you're never actually meeting, that's one thing. Okay. If you meet them and they seem so disconnected and they don't really want to be there, that's a message. Okay. But if every time they see you and it's like, yes, this is great and everything, I tell them, I don't think there's so much of a problem if you're the one who's always reaching out. It's only if they're giving the impression, either directly or subtly, that this is a burden. And it has to be, when I say subtly, it has to actually be, there has to be some sign. You can't just interpret that. You can't mind read, which a lot of people do. Yes. That's what they say. If I'm always reaching out, it must be that I'm the burden. No, there's so many other factors. I say, try it out. And if you get good evidence that you are be seen as a burden and so on, then you have to reevaluate. So just want to throw it out there. Sorry.
Yeah. So on the topic though of colleagues being friends, a lot of questions that I get from clients too is, well, how do you make friends in adulthood and how do you make friends at work? And one of the pieces of guidance that I often give is, because you mentioned that awkwardness that can sometimes occur, asking other people questions about themselves is usually one of the best ways to get a conversation going. And I think we can learn a lot from that too. If there's no reciprocity, then that's, potentially a red flag in a relationship or a friendship. But I find that helps people the most is just ask people questions about themselves and, not cross-examining them, but doing it in a way to try to get to know them.
Yeah, and I'm in the process of finishing my book. That's one of the things that I say. I say you can go onto Google AI. There's lists of questions as long as you don't do it either, as you say, as if you're cross-examining or interrogating them, or if it's so artificial. And I've seen some people do that where it's like, ugh, it's cringy almost because it's like they have it literally looks like they're going through a checklist of all these questions to ask. Okay, you have to practice it. And I say, watch interviews, watch people that are really good at, in a podcast or something like that. See how they ask questions. Look at their body language, right? And I say that, and you're right. I always say the most people, their favorite topic is themselves. So if you can ask the right questions, and I say it doesn't take that much, just a few questions, good questions can really keep the conversation going. And so, so I highly encourage, I agree with you on that. And as you said, if it's 100% about them, and they never reciprocate or show interest in you, obviously that's not a healthy relationship, but it's a good start. Again, asking questions. But again, just reminding that it does take effort, especially starting the relationships, either again, colleagues or outside. And by the way, so I know you had the second question because I want to throw something else in as well, but I want to hear the second question before. Sure. So do you want to jump to the second question? Or?
Yeah. Okay. So second question, and this one tends to cause a lot of contention amongst couples. And I'll be very clear here that I'm referring to heterosexual male-female couples. Can men and women be friends with one another? So I want to hear what your thoughts are first.
Okay, this should be a whole topic. Okay, it really should, and so we will revisit. We have to. So can they? They can. But in so many cases, it starts off with, there's a little bit of a spark, a little bit of tension, a little bit of fun, back and forth, which makes it risky. Or it can, the familiarity, the emotional connection and so on can make people then, imbue the relationship with more than just platonic, interest. So yeah, it's risky. And I don't like, general black and white statements. So if I look at every single example that I know, I know pretty well, whether it's, again, personal life, professional life and so on, I would say it often leads to problems. Doesn't have to, but in many cases it does. And I hate to say it because it's going to sound very superficial, but it's a reality. If one person is, let's say, very physically attractive and the other person is not, then the interest might be just one way. So it might just be unrequited interest or love. Okay. But so it may not go anywhere, but that feeling is going to be there. And that's where the problem is, where the person either is aware of their feelings toward the other person, right? And they feel uncomfortable, especially if that other person's talking about romantic interests, right? And they have to sit there and try to be their friend and supportive while their heart's being torn apart, okay? Or they are in denial and they can't accept. I mean, part of them knows, but they don't allow themselves to accept that. Yeah, I really do like this person, and they're lying to themselves, saying, "I'm happy to hear that they're doing so well with this new partner or something like that." And again, it seeps into the relationship. I've seen and again, whether I see it directly or I hear about it from patients or from friends, it to me is so obvious that the person's inability to handle the fact that that this other person they are ostensibly friends, okay, but they're not seeing them as a romantic interest or a potential romantic interest. They can't accept and handle the fact that it is having an impact on them, and it does taint the relationship.
Yeah, and it absolutely can be complicated. And I think that perhaps the answer might vary for single people versus people who are already in a relationship. And I'll state before I give my thoughts here that just, I guess, given my personality in key parts of my life, my best friends were males. So, I think it is absolutely possible, but it could also potentially come with complications, just as you've described. But I think that the couples that I work with, they tend to take issue with it when their partner has a friend of the opposite sex who is just their friend. I think that's where the problems largely arise. Yep. If it's, if that individual is friends with both members of the couple, or if the couple, two couples are friends and the four of them are having a good friendship amongst themselves, and then the individuals talk, I think that's healthy and okay. But I think largely what I've seen is the problem arises when somebody who is in a relationship has an exclusive individual friendship with somebody of the opposite sex.
Yeah, and it is so tricky, and I've seen this play out so many times, and I'll call people out. I'll say either, look, from what you're telling me, like, I understand why your partner has a concern because of A, B, C, D. Okay, have you shown them those text messages and things like that? So I say, so there may be something legitimately there, even if you haven't acted on it. Still, there's that underlying tension. Okay. And other times I've said, no, I mean, from what you're telling me, it does sound purely platonic. Both of you understand that there isn't a sexual interest for the two of you. Okay. For whatever reason, maybe you guys knew each other a long time and, you're almost like siblings. Like, there are, again, I never take a blanket approach to any of these things. I look at all these different factors, but I do say, at the very least, I say, even if there's nothing there in reality, I say you have to always think of optics, and the optics is so important. And I say, so understand that your partner, like, even if you know that nothing's going on, right? Again, to your partner, it can feel almost insulting. It can feel almost like you're spending more time with them, or you seem to have more fun with them, or other people see you around. That's what I mean by the optics, even if nothing's actually happening. And they're not in each of your heads, and it's not crazy. That's the thing. When the person acts like, what? Why would you even say that? That's ridiculous. That's when I tell them, and we've had these discussions about, I don't believe humans are designed to be monogamous by nature. There's no evidence for that. So it's not crazy for the partner to at least have some concerns. So the person who just outright dismisses it, or rudely dismisses it, gets aggressive about it, how dare you impugn my character, etc. Right? That person's being, I think, very unrealistic, unfair, and unreasonable. Right? And they should at least understand. But I say both sides. I say, if you are truly 100% pure in your intentions, and so is this other person, there's literally nothing going on. I understand why you feel that way, but empathy dictates that you understand why your partner has these concerns, and it's your job to do everything to try to mitigate that, like trying to, bring the person in, so that they can get to know them better. And which can be awkward because, let's say, for example, two women, they might not really like each other, or two men might not like. So I get that it's difficult, but without that attempt, without that discussion, then how would you expect your partner not to think that something either is or could happen between the two of you?
Exactly. And that's the problem that arises in the clients that I work with who find themselves in this situation is they feel very excluded from any sort of discussion. And their partner can then infer, well, I don't need your permission to have so-and-so as a friend. But maybe this is an unpopular opinion, but I think you kind of do. When you're in a relationship or a marriage, I think that there has to be some level of approval from your partner of the people that you're spending your time with, whether it's somebody of the same or opposite sex.
Some level, yeah, and there has to be let's say, a good reason. If they disapprove just because if it's a petty reason or something like that, I say no, right? Okay, but if they have a legitimate reason, and that's the hardest part because, and that's why having a therapist, for example, or a good friend who can mediate, when they explain something from the other person's perspective, they are just opening the person's eyes to the other person's perspective. Whereas when it comes from the other person, it sounds like an attack, or it sounds like they're trying to gain ground. That is a zero-sum game, that they're trying to push their agenda at the detriment of yours. It's very different when it comes from a third party, and especially one who gives both perspectives and shows how each of you have, done something wrong in the way you've handled it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you had another point. What were you thinking?
What I was going to say was that many, many years ago, I can't remember, one of my patients told me, she said, I'm going out this Thursday night with a bunch of people. We're going to see a movie, and then we have dinner afterwards, and we talk about the movie. And I'm a movie buff, so I thought that is so cool. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked, like who these people are, and the way she was describing it, it sounded a bit odd. It didn't sound like normal friends. Like it sounded like there was this meeting, it was planned, blah blah. And so as I was asking questions, I realized, oh, she's the first person who introduced me, and it was in the early stages of this website called Meetup.com.
Oh.
Yes, and this was, I forget how many years ago it was. I'm going to say maybe 15. I could be off, but let's say 10 or 15 years ago, she told me about this. And I checked it out. It's like, oh my gosh. So basically you just, you type in your postal code and you type in some keywords, like it could be movies, it could be hiking, rock climbing, stamps, whatever it is. Okay, meetup.com in your postal code. And then it shows you all these different, let's say, privately organized events that are happening with that subject in mind. And so I say to people, it's amazing because now I've heard, I looked recently with a patient and there were some events that were saying free, some were charged, others were free. And someone told me a while back, and maybe it was just what they were looking at, where they were saying that all these different events to go, you had to pay money. I was like, wait, that's not what I saw before. Okay. So, do your due diligence. I don't think it's everything. I know some were charged, some said free, but basically the fact is it allows you to meet people who have the same interest. That's the thing. You're all there for the same reason. You like movies? Now you're going. So I tell people, I say a couple of things. I say, look, you can go to 10 of them and maybe 9 of them will have people that you would never want to, spend time in a room with. So I say, I'm not guaranteeing it's not a panacea to everything, but it's an option. And again, because you're going there, it's not that awkward because you're going there with the same intention. We're going to do this or we're going to do that, right? So it's already set up. Number one. Number two, for a lot of people who don't have many friends, or they can't really associate with them outside of work because that's just not the nature of the work or whatever the case is. I say, and they're looking for a love interest, mm-hmm. and they don't want to go doing online dating. Right. So I say, you can do meetup.com, but you have to play the long game. Now, so many of my patients, when I tell them meetup.com, they're looking for all these single events. Okay. Like they're doing it for that reason. And I say, if you can find that, okay, go ahead and try it. I said, but instead it's about, like I say, playing the long game. It's getting to know, getting a new friend group. Cause you were saying, how do you make friends in adulthood? Well, this is one way. It's artificial because it's, it's done this way, but being at work, that's artificial in a way. You didn't, it's anyway. So I tell them, think of it as I might not find my love interest in this group, but maybe if I go to all these different meetups, I will find 1 or 2 people who I actually become friends with. And they're going to open the door to their friend groups. And so, whether there's a love interest there or it's through another person, whatever, I say it's just look at it with that perspective. Don't expect an immediate hit. Maybe not instant gratification, but you might find a few open doors that can lead to something. And it can also be about job opportunities or, other interests and everything like that. So meetup.com, I should have invested in this site a long time ago because I've referred so many people to it. But and still to this day, many years later, so many people don't know about it.
Yeah. I didn't know that existed, and I love it for many reasons. So I think that it's a great idea just based on what you described. But it's funny because my personal trainer, she is just a lovely human being. We hit it off like right away, like lots of laughs, got lots of work done in our personal training sessions too. But she's a really like high performing, tough, cool person who has a really hard time making friends. So I remember a few times she and I talked about friendships and a lot of the same things that we're talking about in this episode today. And we both joked and said, you know what, we should develop an app that's just like a dating app, but it's for friends. So now I hear you say this, I'm like, well, shit, I guess I should have gotten on that because clearly it is needed and it's a great idea. But I think just like with dating apps, right, there's going to be some good connections, some not so good connections. Mm-hmm. But I think with the way that the world is today, it's really a great way that you could potentially meet good friends who have similar interests, because that's probably one of the best ways to meet people and meet people who you're going to have a connection with is, doing things that are of interest to you, because chances are somebody who has that shared interest will be there as well, whether it's an art show or an art class or cooking class or you name it, whatever one's interest is. I think that's the best place to meet people. So yeah, I guess with adult friendships, there's a lot of things that people can do. One of which, like I said, going to events or classes or activities that you're interested in hopes that you can meet up with people who have those same interests. But as far as how else people can develop new friendships, there's not a lot of options, I suppose, for adults. And that I think is in large part where the challenge comes from with not just maintaining friendships, but developing new ones as time goes on. So what are some other things that you've experienced as far as clients and how they've made friends in adulthood?
Well, it's one thing is like I've really encouraged trying to make adult friendships just because, as we talked about, sometimes you outgrow previous friendships. So I just want to really emphasize that it's not a bad thing, because some people see that as a failure. Like, what, I have to now farm out new people? Like that's really difficult for them to. And it's like, well, no, just again, life got in the way. It doesn't mean you're a failure. It doesn't mean that they're bad or whatever. Just that's how life is. So I'm just saying that that's something that people have to really overcome, that mindset. As far as what they're doing, a lot of it is through I've seen like through physical activities. Like they'll join a gym, rock climbing got really big a number of years ago. So many people, said that they were doing that. So they find that kind of activity. If they're living in a condo, they try to, they would try to find any communal events that were at the condo. Sometimes very awkward, but it's a way to do it. I've recommended people, I say, hang out at coffee shops, like, that are kind of busy or whatever, become a regular. If you can, and sort of, like little by little, don't push it too hard, but that's where you might be able to meet someone. I say, but the thing is, you said this earlier, and I tell everybody, I say, when you do, if you do this, always have some good questions at the ready. Okay. One of my patients mentioned this one, and he recommended the show to me based on this. He said when he meets people, first question he asks, he goes, what are some good shows you're watching? Because he wants to, load it up, and he wants to be able to do that, right? So it's, it's not rocket science here, and but a lot of people, they can say this is something that they watch, or they go, I don't watch TV. Okay, well, what do you do? Again, come with good questions. That's why I say it doesn't matter where you are, find a good question.
Yeah. And I would say to pair with that, have some good answers yourself, right? So if you're asking like, where do you like to travel, and have something with, where you like to travel yourself. And I guess as well, maybe reframing in adult friendships is important as well. It's kind of came to mind as we're talking about this, that the developmental tasks of our 30s, 40s, and 50s are very different than they are in adolescence and in our 20s. And perhaps reframing friendships as not serving the same purposes as they do in those earlier stages. So, in later life, it could potentially just be more about entertainment and doing things together and having a fun time together, with the understanding that one's partner or family or kids or whatever are where you get that deep connection. So it's okay if every friend that you have isn't somebody that you are like deeply and intimately connected with. It can just be for fun too.
And that's really, really important. And that's why I said you just need one person that you feel really, really has your back. And if anyone else is just, again, it's just someone that you hang out with, or, because I've had some people say, oh my God, they're just so much. They don't know how to turn it off. I say, okay, then you make sure that you're only with them in certain contexts. They don't have to be that person that you confide in and so on. But again, going back to I just want to say that one more time. It's that inability to have at least that one person where they feel they can be vulnerable, where they can confide in them, where they can share something they really want to talk about. That's where I feel like I see that really, where people have that loneliness. And that's where a partner, in theory, should be your built-in, receptacle. Like they can handle all the stuff that you dump on them and so on. But, and for some people, they have that partner, but they don't feel that intimacy. So they're still desperately looking. Like it's complicated. It takes a lot of effort, and it's so easy to sabotage with the wrong beliefs. And I think that again, when I think about it with all the patients I've worked with, it goes back to something I said earlier, which is really asking yourself, what assumptions are you bringing into these existing relationships or these potentially new relationships? What belief systems do you have? Like, and are they healthy? Are they based on anything? Again, like, as you're saying, like if someone says, well, for this person to be a friend, they must have these type of criteria, or I must feel a certain way. Well, no, that's about a certain type of friendship. Okay. Again, you can get something from this, and this type of friendship as well. And it may not be as rewarding as you want, because a lot of people have a black and white right thing. So they might meet 5 new people and, they get different things from them, but it's not this ideal friendship that they were looking for. It's not my best friend. So then they just shit all over it and not realize, well, wait, that was still pretty good.
There's value in that still as well. Yeah.
Exactly. So having the right perspective is critical. And again, I'll say it one more time. Most friendships do take work, especially new ones. And the embarrassment part, okay, because you said it earlier, if I'm always the person asking, okay, or if there's a group of people that I met through Meetup or whatever, okay, and then I try to ingratiate myself further, and I try to go into them and I say, hey, what are you doing this weekend or whatever? What if they say no? That embarrassment is going to inhibit so much. And there are many people, people with avoidant personality disorder is the worst case, where it's just, they're so terrified of rejection, of being laughed at or something like that. And so again, so people should recognize what is inhibiting me. Because someone who's extroverted, they may still have that sense of, I'm terrified of being, rejected. So I think people really have to recognize that. And the big question again, what am I looking for? And what's stopping, what unhealthy beliefs, what stops me from, reaching out or whatever? What am I really afraid is going to happen? Like, how bad can it really be? Stuff like that. And cost benefit analysis. Okay. Yeah. The risk is maybe I'm going to be embarrassed. Maybe they'll say no, but the benefit is I won't be so lonely or stuff like that. So anyway.
Yeah. And I guess the last thing I'll mention here, and it really, you've encompassed and captured most of what I was going to say here, but I think that male friendships, like male and male friendships and female friendships are a little bit different. And maybe, what women are looking for in their friendships is different than what men are looking for. But I think regardless, those things that you mentioned do apply, and just ensuring that you know what it is that you're looking for in a friendship and having some flexibility with that is what is key.
Yeah. And as always, with everything we always talk about, be honest with yourself. You maybe not be honest with the other person, but be honest with yourself. And if there's someone who, again, is opposite sex person or whatever, and they are attractive and you have feelings for them, either you take the risk and try it and, either get rejected, embarrassed or whatever, okay, or maybe break the friendship with it, or come to terms with it and say, you know what? I know they're really hot. I wish they would be my partner, but okay, either they're not interested in me or they already have a partner or I have a partner, or whatever. So I have to get this from them. I can't get what I really want, but I can still get this. And if this is not sufficient, if you're going to lie to yourself and pretend that you're okay, you're not doing any of, either of you favors. So again, it's the honesty with yourself, what you want, what's going on, what does this mean, and everything. That's so important. As always, self-honesty.
So listeners, we want to know what your experiences are with adult friendships. Do you find them easy? Are they difficult? Have you experienced many of the things that we've talked about today? Let us know in the comments.
And on that note, until next time, keep your eyes on the road and your hands upon the wheel.